This Choircast podcast is brought to you by Heretic Happy Hour, whose tagline is burning questions, not people. You know, we've been around for a long time now, and we've had many different lineups. And Heretic Happy Hour is only getting bigger and better with guest hosts like Rainn Wilson, David Bentley Hart, John Fugelsang, Candida Moss, Elaine Pagels, and of course, December Rose. 2024 and 2025 are turning out to be our best years yet. So check us out on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. It's Heretic Happy Hour. We hope to see you soon.
Western Christianity has spent the last 2,000 years telling everyone they're separated from God.
This is Not Church with John and Nat Turney and Bethany Shea.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the podcast that we lovingly call This Is Not Church. As Nat is often to say after that, because if it was church, you would have left by now. Which then we'd go on with, and we'd be following right behind. Unfortunately, Nat and Bethany are not available to be with us today, but I have the honor and the privilege of having someone step in as a co-host for us, and I want to introduce him really quick. I mean, I'm not going to really introduce him. He's been on the podcast so many times that he should be a co-host by now. I mean, that's how many times you've been on, Keith. So I'd like everybody to be introduced to Keith Giles, my temporary co-host, and ask how are you doing today?
Well, thank you so much, John. Yeah, I'm doing really good, actually. I'm sorry to hear about Nat and Bethany not feeling well, but I'm very happy to be your co-pilot for this episode and co-host. Yeah. It's a lot of fun. It's fun to go on other shows and be a co-host like that. I haven't done it myself in a while, but I was out from Heretic Happy Hour a couple of months ago, and I had other people step in for me. So it's my turn. I have to step in for someone else.
So what have you been up to lately, Keith?
Well, you won't believe this, but I wrote a book. Coming out. It's coming out May 5th. The Quantum Gospel of Philip and the Valentinian Christ.
Oh, nice.
And as part of that series, I did the Quantum Sayings of Jesus, looking at Thomas, the Quantum Gospel of Mary, and this is the third one in the series. So, yeah.
Nice.
Coming out.
Well, would you like to take the honors of introducing our panel today?
Sure, I'll do my best, and then they can jump in and say howdy. I'm actually going to read their bios from the book that we're going to talk about, because each of them contributed to the book. So I'll start with, I'm just going to go around the Brady Bunch squares here, at least the way I see them. I don't know everybody else sees them the way I do, but Mo Thomas is the author of Into the Abyss and Snow Globe. He is a frequent guest on podcasts highlighting the intersection of science and spirituality, and has facilitated numerous online discussions on theology, mindfulness, and quantum physics. Mo, welcome to the podcast.
It's good. Great to be here. Thanks, Keith. Thanks, John.
Yeah, very cool. And we'll talk about your contribution to this book in just a minute. Also, joining us for this discussion is Brandy Anderson. Brandy is a Silver Nautilus Award-winning author of Through the Veil, A Glimpse into the Afterlife, a contemplative exploration of life, death, and human consciousness that invites readers into a deeper mystery of existence. So welcome to the podcast. Actually, you've been here before, right, Brandy?
No, I haven't. This is my first time on. Yeah.
This is the first time for all three.
Come on, John. What are you doing?
Yeah, I know. I'm slacking, I guess.
Come on. She's a great guest. Well, welcome to the This Is Not Church podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Also joining us is Nish Dubashia, a British author and integral thinker, known for creating the diamond model, which integrates Bohmian physics, integral theory, and Eastern philosophy. He has presented his work at global forums such as the Humanity Rising Global Summit, World Unity Week, and the Science and Consciousness Conference. Nish is the author of 4 books, including The Unity of Everything and A Brief History of God, which have briefly appeared on bestseller lists and other things. So Nish, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Yeah, it's really great to have all three of you here to talk about this book, which I don't think we've even introduced, which is Quantum Theology Volume 1.
Yes, that's right.
Which Keith also is the editor of and wrote the foreword to.
Yeah, that's right.
So I've had the pleasure of reading some of the book. I have not read it all. To say I'm confused a little bit, because I'm not really caught up on quantum theory as well as other people. Nat would be a really good one here, because Nat's been jumping onto these like YouTube videos about quantum theory and all that. Oh, cool. And he's always wanted to chat with me about it. So his voice will be missed today, but I'd like to start out with Keith and just ask you a question. How did you even come about getting all these essays together, and was it a difficult task putting them together, or was it one of those things where like you started working on it and it all started to kind of click as you went?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, so we got the idea for the book. I like I said, I've personally been writing this series of books looking at some of the Nag Hammadi texts and some of the sort of lost gospels in this quantum theology series, and they've been very popular. And I've gotten personally a lot of great feedback about those books. But I thought I would like to just see more. The other hat that I wear is I'm the co-owner of Choir Publishing. So I thought I would love for Choir to publish more books in this area and talk about this a little more. So Matthew DiStefano and I said, well, let's put together this anthology. So I just kind of made the announcement on Facebook and Instagram. Hey, we're going to do this book on quantum theology. We invited people who wanted to, submit their chapters, and several other people recommended others to us. So that's how Nish came. I didn't know Nish before this process, but someone I did know, William Serrell, who contributed to the book. He said, "Hey, Keith, you should talk to Nish Dubashia," and I was like, "Okay." So he connected us, and Nish turned in this really amazing chapter. So yeah, I just put the word out. I started getting a whole bunch of submissions in my inbox, and it was wonderful. Actually, we've done several kind of anthology books like this in the past on different topics, and it always happens that you open it up. I have a general idea of what I hope I'm going to get, and what I actually got was way, way better than I could have imagined. And not only did we get a lot of quality chapters that were sent in to consider for the book, there was an incredible amount of quantity. And so I had to go through a lot. The hardest thing probably was reading through all of them and determining, A, are they going to make it into the book? And 2, then where in the book would they, because, you have to create a flow, kind of like, what do we start with and what comes after that? So yeah, I would say it wasn't difficult to get people to send us things. The challenge was really more in just deciding what we were going to put in the book. In fact, I got so many things, there's going to be a volume 2. So that'll be later next year.
So I'd like to throw out a question to all three of you, and you can answer it in any order you want. And that's, what does quantum theory, how do you connect quantum theory to theology? Because that seems like, we have this idea of quantum theology from quantum theory, and how do you connect the two? And like I said, we can do it alphabetical, we can do it whichever way you want to do.
I'll give it a go. If we compare quantum physics, which is really the physics of subatomic particles, it's the physics of the very, very small, with traditional theology, or theology as is traditionally understood, then there's probably not that much in common. They're two very, very different ways of looking at the world. What is interesting is that, especially now that we're in modern times, traditional theology is something that fewer and fewer people seem to be able to really align with. And I think quantum physics, in some sense, as the most fundamental science, can perhaps give us insights into how a new theology can emerge out of the traditional theology that might be able to align better with the modern mind. I think that's the way the thinking is going. And if reality is reality, if reality is one, which I think all believe that it is, then we should see similarities. Quantum physics and theology, as we're trying to help it emerge, should actually be different lenses on that same reality, and we should find correspondences, and I think all of us have started to suggest what those correspondences are.
Yeah. So Mo or Brandy, is there anything you'd like to add on to that?
Maybe just on top of what Nish said, I find the same. If I look at the mainstream version of theology that we have in place now, the literal, inerrant reading of the sacred text, there's not a lot of overlap. The Venn diagram would be very small. But if you look at certain portions of the scripture especially, and you read with a metaphysical or contemplative lens, then you'll see it. You'll start seeing it emerge. I think quantum physics for me was a push rather than just a nudge in that direction. It was a push to see this sacred text through a contemplative lens, and the same lens then that you can take with other sacred texts and see what they're pointing to. So for me, rather than the scriptures being a pointer back to itself as being the only way, it has become a beautiful pointer toward this ultimate reality that other texts and the creation are also pointing to. So it has reframed the purpose of theology in the first place, rather than a pointer back to itself, a pointer to something outside of itself.
Yeah. Yeah, I love what both of you said, and it'd be really hard to elaborate really on that. But I would just say that it's like an overlap in the way that I see it. You have quantum physics, and then you have theology, and if you lay them on top of one another, you can kind of see the correlations. I guess one way to say it would be the mystics were always kind of pointing at what quantum physics is beginning to show us. So while there really isn't a direct correlation between modern theology, as both of you have already said, I believe that it's all pointing to the deeper reality. And so when we use quantum physics, when we look at it through that lens, we begin to get a deeper, more fuller picture of what reality really is. And so for me, it just brought all of my, I guess, theology into sharper focus in a way that was not possible through a theological lens entirely. So I think it's about a marriage of the two that brings us into something more beautiful and more true.
I feel like it does bring us into connection with the mystics. I mean, that seems to be, and what some of you have called the Gnostic Gospels, which is an interesting term in itself. Be it they are Gnostic or not, that's a whole other conversation we could have. But it does seem that this does connect to a more mystical side of the faith, does it not?
Yeah, and I guess I'd throw out a question for you, the three of you as well, along the lines of where we're going already. It feels like the having a conversation about quantum and the quantum theology, it does feel in a way, or I guess I just phrase it as a question, does it feel in a way like it's something new? Whereas I think theology up to, classic theology we're all kind of familiar with is pretty settled and certain, and it's all about answers. Whereas introducing the quantum element now, does it feel more like turning now to a place of mystery and a place of discovery and curiosity rather than sort of knowing?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely true for me. The entire goal of the faith journey, as I was taught growing up, was certainty. To arrive at a place where your faith is unshakable, it can't be questioned. Questions were squelched immediately because it was dangerous to venture outside a safe airspace. You might be shot down. So quantum physics opens up this world where the traditional understanding of the standard model just gets blown to high hell. And now you got to start asking deeper questions and reframing and rethinking. I think pure science, unlike maybe those that are in it for proving a certain narrative, the ones that are open, the ones that dive deep, always rethink their models as new evidence shows up. And that's what happened for me. As new evidence started to show up, the old models simply couldn't handle it. It was new wine trying to squeeze in old wineskins, and they just burst. And eventually that shift from certainty to the unknown, to the mystery of what the cosmos was showing, just became a lifelong exploration, which I hope to be true since that point. It has been true, and I hope that's, that I'm a lifelong explorer down this rabbit hole.
Yeah. Yeah, the same is true for me. I spent years plugged into churches where certainty was front and center. Everyone expected that you had certainty. That's what belief was kind of framed as. And so for me, when I shifted away from that theological way of framing things, but also just shifted completely out of church and landed in a more mystical place, I found quantum science to be more resonant with where I was in a spiritual sense, because the more we know, the more we realize we'll never know. And that's what quantum physics sort of shows us. I mean, while there may be models and theories, to definitively land somewhere is to basically try to reduce life into something static. And it's not. It's a dance. And I think that's what quantum science is showing us. Life is a dance. And our relationship with the divine is also a dance. And so it can't be flattened by theology without repercussions. And so for me, it was definitely a lot more freeing to land in that more mystical space and, and view it through like a quantum physics type lens.
I think there's an interesting parallel between science and spirituality here, which is that as we move from what we could call the exoteric in both fields to the esoteric in both fields, things become less certain. So in science, we had traditional physics, for example, Newtonian mechanics. It's all very certain. There's definite answers to everything, set laws that always hold. But as we move towards what we could argue is more fundamental, subatomic particles, the quantum field, things become uncertain. We can't predict things. Things start to break the normal rules of logic. And a similar movement can be found, I think, in spirituality when we're dealing with more exoteric spirituality, which is, I would say, the traditional religions. You have very specific things to believe and specific answers to questions. You can write out catechisms based on questions and answers. But as we move to what, again, we could argue is more fundamental, as we move closer to the divine, we move towards the mystical territory, things become uncertain. We start to go beyond these simple beliefs. We start to go beyond the simple dualisms and linguistic certainties that characterize religious beliefs. So there's an interesting movement, I think, which parallels each other. The closer you come to the more fundamental reality, the more your certainty is shaken.
Would it be better to then really connect this to spirituality as opposed to theology? Because it seems like theology, we kind of get an idea of what theology is, especially within the Christian faith. And we kind of get stuck into a dogma. Whereas spirituality kind of opens it up to even, more ideas within Christianity, but then other faiths also. And, we can be more open and accepting of these other ideas, right?
It's kind of like the idea of God. It comes with so much baggage, just like the word theology does.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the study of God, this mystery, is probably still accurate if you can shake it free of the baggage that's been attached to it. So I'm okay with quantum theology. I love quantum spirituality as well. But, if you can shake it loose and just let it be the uninhibited study of the divine, then you're on the track to do what Nish just described, move from an external, exoteric, certain view, the simplistic model maybe we started out as kids, to closer to the divine. Now things aren't so certain. You've got to get comfortable with the mystery of it.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah, it's a bit of a redefining, I think, of your terms, Like Nish, as you were talking about how it used to be when you talked about physics, you were assuming Newtonian physics. And again, in the minds of people at that point, scientists, physics was set. Whereas now, because of quantum, now when you say physics, it's like we don't need a new word for physics. We just need to think about physics in a different way. And in the same way, it's like we don't need a new word for theology. It's just we need to start thinking about theology as being less certain and more open-ended and embracing that mysteriousness of it.
I mean, I agree with all of them, all of the speakers so far, that we can still keep the term theology. I suppose my concern about losing that and moving just to spirituality is we might start to lose what is distinctively Christian here, because spirituality could apply to all the traditions. And I suppose as we move towards the esoteric center, if you like, the traditions start to have a lot in common, which is great. But I think we also want to hold on to what each tradition can uniquely contribute, because that sometimes gets overlooked because everyone wants to find out what's in common. So if we hold on to distinctly Christian language, but also reinterpret what we mean, we can do both. We have the unity of traditions, but we also maintain the diversity as well.
Yeah, that's great. Back to quantum physics a little bit. What if, is there one thing that really like grabbed you into this idea of looking into quantum physics? Was there something that like, you're like, oh, I need to know more about this? That was like the linchpin that like had you jump down that rabbit hole?
Well, I've shared this with Keith before, but I had an experience in 2012 where I was taken through a black hole. And it wasn't just bad pizza. It was a mystical experience that really reframed my understanding of God, of myself, of the world, of the cosmos. And that was my gateway into quantum physics. I saw things that I had no slot for. And the only thing that appeared to resonate with that was what I heard in the world of quantum physics. So I just started diving in then, and it has been a beautiful, terrifying at times rabbit hole of discovery and exploration. So yeah, black holes were my gateway.
Black holes.
Yeah. And a lot like Mo, I had an experience after my grandmother crossed. I had somewhat of a spiritual, paranormal type experience that sort of was the gateway into my interest in quantum physics. I began to have questions that I couldn't answer with the traditional religious, frameworks. And so, yeah, I just kind of went down that rabbit hole, and the correlations were striking. I mean, when you begin to really dive down the quantum physics rabbit hole, you begin to see that, all of the mystical language that the mystics were using to try to describe the divine, really it's there in quantum physics, and it's in such a lucid way too. And I guess for my way of thinking about things, it just made it a lot more lucid and understandable and easy to process. So yeah, I just kind of jumped into it, and I didn't, I won't say that I went as far down it as some people do, because it's so sciencey, and I am more of a mystical minded person. But I did delve far enough that it helped me to kind of bring into sharper focus some of my more spiritual views. Yeah.
That's nice. That's great.
I kind of came across it in a slightly different way to Mo and Brandy. I was at university, I was a student, and I spent most of my first year being a very vocal anti-religion atheist. And I just thought religion and spirituality is just superstitious nonsense. But I suppose at some level I wanted to find a way to be spiritual without having to give up intellectual integrity. And I came across a book when I was 19 called The Tao of Physics by Fritjof Capra, where I'm sure you will come across it, where he looks at parallels between quantum physics and the Eastern traditions, kind of like we're doing here with Christianity. And I read it and I got really excited because it opened up a way, I thought, where I can be spiritual, but also not commit intellectual suicide doing that. And quantum physics seemed to provide a way for me to do that. So that was my motivation when I discovered it.
What about you, Keith?
Yeah, it's interesting because I personally went through my deconstruction process, and I read all these books, the Jesus Un series, and kind of dealt one at a time with these different sort of Christian doctrines and the pillars of the Christian faith that I was personally wrestling with and trying to make sense of. When I finished that series, I literally came to a place of kind of like, well, now what, And then at that point, I realized that it was really less about a theology of answers and more about returning to a theology of wonder and awe. And so I wrote this, this book, Sola Mysterium, about embracing mystery, and Sola Deus, about the nature of God. And so then I was kind of on that path. And it was actually during the time I was researching the book, Sola Mysterium, I read a book by Dr. Amit Goswami called The Self-Aware Universe, where he started connecting the dots for me, primarily talking about certain specific things about what we're learning about reality from quantum physics, about how human consciousness seems to kind of be the ground of reality and not materialism, which is very strange. And, things like quantum entanglement and things like this, but then applied these concepts to spiritual concepts. And that was really super helpful for me. And so as I was moving away from certainty, moving into more of mystery, I think the quantum theology, the quantum stuff started giving me a new way to think about, God, not in such a rigid way that I had been taught to in my Christianity growing up, but realizing that these are concepts that transcended those ideas of God that I had. And so that's kind of how I ended up here.
One of the things I feel that comes up a lot is this idea of connectedness, that we are connected through our quantum existence, or whatever you want to call it, that there is an underlying connectedness to everything, that being all humans, all creation, everything. Can one of you guys explain how what that even means?
Yeah, well, I would just say that, on a quantum level, what is it? It's entanglement, where if two particles come into contact with one another, they're forever entangled. So regardless of the distance that they travel beyond that, if you were to observe one particle, the other one would respond. So it would affect the other one. So, and ultimately at a subatomic level, everything is interconnected. And to say that, then we are all interconnected, because we are all made up entirely of particles. If you take it down far enough, you begin to see that there are no others. There is just one field of consciousness in which we are all expressions. So, people use the waves in the ocean, as a way of kind of spiritually explaining how we are all interconnected parts of the ocean. But I believe that quantum science just does a really good job of showing how scientifically that is true. And so, and it postulates theories that people who, like Nish was saying, you want something that you can hang on to in an intellectual way and not just woo-woo, mystical jargon. So I think that quantum science really breaks it down in a way that makes it accessible to people who need that intellectual component. And then mysticism is describing the same thing when they, use metaphors like waves in the ocean and such as that.
I think I found the same, Brandy, that being an engineer for 30 plus years in the auto industry, I had so many friends, scientific-minded friends, who just outright dismissed anything to do with traditional Christianity and faith because it was just not able to contain the intellectual part. They just dismissed it outright. As much as I would try in my growing up days to convince them, the science just wasn't there to back that model of faith and of reality. And so for me, the idea, for example, of Jesus, the vine and the branches, same as the ocean and the waves, that's a great metaphor showing that we're all connected, that from a distance, it's one living organism. But how is that? How does that play itself out scientifically? And entanglement really is a beautiful model backed by fundamental reality of quantum physics to explain and to offer a model for how that's true.
One thing that's interesting is that the phenomenon of quantum entanglement can be quite difficult to explain purely at the level of the manifest order or the explicate order. So, for example, if you have two particles that are traveling away from each other at the speed of light, and I think this has been done as a thought experiment mathematically, they would still remain entangled. But how is that possible? Because one can't possibly be sending a signal to the other one, because you'd have to go faster than the speed of light to get there, and there's nothing faster than the speed of light. So one, for me, quite persuasive theory has been that there is an underlying implicate order beneath this explicate order where there is just this one unified wholeness. So at this deeper level, these particles are not separate at all. They're all literally the same unity. And that unity shows up in the manifest order as this interconnectedness. And maybe this underlying wholeness, this underlying dimension that's implicit to everything, is the quantum physics version of what the mystic would call the divine. It's the unity behind all things. So that's a new way of maybe thinking about what God could or might be, the underlying unity behind all things, the ground of all being, rather than a distant creator who's just created everything.
I always summarize what you guys are saying as that the quantum field is everything and everything is the quantum field. And that we are, just summarizing kind of what you guys are saying, like everything we see in the universe, including us, but every physical object, every living thing, every planet, every star, everything we can physically see in the universe is actually fundamentally the same thing. It's just an expression of that thing. And that's what quantum science, quantum physics is saying, which again goes to this idea of this shared divinity and shared humanity, that we are all connected to the divine. We're all connected to one another. And those two truths are inseparable. And that to me is the core of what I would call a quantum theology. It's pretty simple in some ways, but it's exciting. I think, again, Nish talked about, the specific Christian perspective of this theology, this quantum theology. To me, it becomes more practical way of putting into practice the things that you're understanding how when Jesus says things like, love your neighbor as yourself or love your enemy, like this makes it possible because if I understand this is the whole universe. This is the basic reality there, that I am connected to everyone and everyone is connected to the divine. Then when I look at my neighbor, I don't just see another person. I see myself and I see the divine reflected in that person or in my enemy or in anyone, right? And if humanity embraces this is the end of genocide, of poverty, of racism, of all the things that separate us, that pull us apart. All those things that pull us apart are not real. These are man-made concepts and ideas, but fundamentally those things are not real. They're not true. The truth is our connectedness to God and to one another. And that to me is pretty exciting.
The one thing Nish had mentioned about the underlying reality, I like the 3 I's that I've heard: the invisible, infinite, indivisible reality. And that's the wholeness from which we see everything emerge. I like John 14 through 17 in the Gospels as Jesus' manifesto on entanglement, especially toward the end there in John 17. So when I read that from a quantum physics lens, I see him describing this infinite, indivisible, invisible reality that connects us all. And so love others as yourself isn't, I first need to love myself then so I can love others. Loving myself is loving the other because there is no other in this model. And so in traditional Christendom, God is omnipresent. God is spirit, everywhere present. So this presence through a model like quantum physics and the idea of entanglement gives it grounding. It's not just this abstract idea. In fact, in traditional Christendom, you have those that are in and those that are out. Some have it, some don't. You have to do this in order to be on the inside. This starts from a fundamental understanding that all of us are connected from the outset. That's our origin. And so things unfold very differently from that starting point, as in Genesis 3, we're starting from a place of duality, and it unfolds then as a problem to be fixed rather than a reality that we awaken to. And that sounds like a nuanced difference, but it's very fundamentally different from the outset.
I hear another verse where, Jesus is talking about doing unto the least of these, you do unto me. Right. Mm-hmm. And that seems like another connection. It's like, if whatever you do to these, you're doing to me. Whatever you're doing to me, you're doing to the least of these. It all intertwines and connects. And it seems like there's this interconnectedness continually throughout that.
Right. Yeah, it really is. Once you start looking at the scriptures, at the words of Jesus and even the words of Paul, which I'm doing right now, that's my next book I'm working on, is the quantum sayings of the Apostle Paul. But it's really everywhere. It's really exciting to start seeing it because, when Paul says to idol worshiping pagans in Athens that there's this God that loves them and is the one in whom they all live and move and have their being. Like, he's not saying this to Christians. He's saying this to idol worshiping pagans in Athens, Hey, you're connected to this being in ways you don't even know. And it doesn't matter if you know it. It's not about believing it. It just is. You just are. So yeah, there's so many things that, again, once you start looking, you see how Jesus uses this language, how Paul uses this language, how the mystics have been using this kind of language for a very long time. And so it's very exciting now to see quantum science validating some of these ideas.
I feel like there's also, Brandy, you talked about this, like the woo-woo stuff, but I feel like there's a connection even to that, where it does give you a connection to this mystical, undefinable part of theology or spirituality that, I mean, I have my own like moment, right? Where like, I can't explain it. It doesn't make any sense. And I think it has to do with the connectedness. And really quick, I'll make the story short. My daughter, when she was about 2, we went to visit my great grandmother, who would have been her great great grandmother, and who we named my daughter after her middle name. And weeks later, we're at home, and my daughter's in the front room talking to somebody, having a conversation. And I'm like, and I came in and I said, "Who are you talking to?" And she says, "Grandma Lena." And then I get a phone call from my mom telling me that my grandma had just passed away.
Wow.
So it's just one of those like, okay, how connected are we all? How connected is everything that even death doesn't have a barrier for the connectedness that we all have, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the difference between, experiential and cognitive reality. And I think that both aspects are necessary. I mean, we need logic and reason, and we need things to make sense in an intellectual way, but also we need that experience, that intuitive knowing. So it's kind of a both and some people kind of start with the intellectual side first, maybe if they're more cerebral, more in that thinking component. But some people are more intuitive from the jump. And so they start in that woo-woo mystical arena and maybe gravitate into the more intellectual side of things. I think it's just a way of making sense of reality or trying to make sense of reality. I don't think we will ever entirely be able to understand reality. But I think both. I think both components are necessary. And I definitely think that what is unseen is more real than what is seen. And so when our loved ones cross, they are not gone. And that quantum realm just overlaps this physical realm. And so we are surrounded. It's in Hebrews, the great cloud of witnesses. Well, who are those? Except spirits. They're a team of light that surround us, cheering us on. Loved ones, guides, however you like to think of it. So yeah, the spiritual component or quantum component in my way of seeing things is what's really real. That's what's that's what is most prominent in our lives. It's just that we get distracted by the physical realm.
And that is the way that Native Americans thought of it too. Like, I read Black Elk. There's a book about Black Elk that's just phenomenal. And that's the way they talk. And it's so natural for them to think that way. But there was one passage where he's talking about, I think he's talking about Crazy Horse, who was his friend who had died. And the way he talks about it is that Crazy Horse is now in the place that is more real, than this one. That's how they thought. That's the way they believed, that we were sort of living in a shadow kind of place, but that to die is to go into the place that's ultimately real.
Yeah, I love that. That's how I view it 100%.
I wonder if we've just been immersed in a culture and a society that places so much emphasis on us being a body and mind, that combination. Wisdom teachers referred to it as the body mind. So we just assume that is the most real part of us. Mm-hmm. And we overlook the deeper, eternal part of us that is ultimately and fundamentally connected to the whole, because that's not what we have been taught to perceive first and foremost. So when we identify by our body mind, then we interact as if that's the most important thing. But like Brandy said, and Keith, you pointed out, I think fundamental to that, you have to look under the surface of what you take in through the 5 senses, right? Because at the fundamental level, quantum physics would suggest that in the subatomic world, there is no such thing as matter. Not as we understand it. Swirling vortexes of energy that are more like wisps of smoke than they are of solid particles.
Right. All the building blocks of matter are like atoms, for example, which are mostly empty space. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Which is, it can't even wrap our brains around this. Like even how when we touch something physically, we feel like we're touching something, but actually at the subatomic level, we're really not. We're not contact, like some fields are interacting with other fields. But yeah, it's insane when you think about it that way. But the idea as well that we're not, and I think this is what I appreciate about quantum physics is that, it is a shift away from this Newtonian physics. It's a shifting towards the quantum physics, which does say that, rather than looking at the material world as being the foundation of reality, that it is more consciousness. And which is why I think we also see so many scientists now studying consciousness, which is another exciting field just to dive into and go down the rabbit hole on. I saw a really great panel discussion with all these amazing scientists who are currently studying human consciousness. And it was a fascinating panel. But the most amazing thing about it to me was that none of them agreed. They all disagree with each other, but not in a bad way. Not like I'm right and you're wrong. Just more like, well, that's interesting the way that perspective that you have. But my research is suggesting this other thing, and they were all wide open to it. They were all like, wow, how does that work with what I'm seeing? And again, that I appreciate that scientists in this field are embracing the curiosity and are embracing the mystery of it. Because it seems like the more we try to answer one question, we just create 5 more questions, right? That's the beginning of this whole quantum thing, right? It started with this double slit experiment where we're trying to figure out what is light? Is it a particle or a wave? And the result of that experiment was that it didn't answer that question, but it actually then said, how do particles know if we're watching or not? Which wasn't a question we knew we needed to ask, but now suddenly we did. And then, in what way does it know? How does it know that what we're going to do before we do it and all that kind of stuff? So, yeah, I appreciate that. And I think it breathes new life into theology. It does for me. And I think anybody leaning more in this quantum theology direction, it's a breath of fresh air because it isn't about dogmatism. It isn't about certainty. It really is about this awe and this wonder and this curiosity and this openness to, what else is out there? What else are we going to learn? And that's very exciting.
I do think this is a beautiful emergence that the materialist view that consciousness arises from the brain and material is now being questioned and challenged, that consciousness might be the fundamental, which I think aligns much more beautifully with what the mystics have been telling us. And, I love, Nish, you've had a lot of interaction with Bohm and his research in the work that you've done. I wonder if you had anything from what you've had interactions with him on this idea that maybe science is starting to push back on the materialist model and instead propose another fundamental or irreducible reality from which what we see here in physical space emerges.
Yeah, I think David Bohm made a couple of points that I think are useful here. He suggested that, in fact, the more we know about manifest reality, the more we are compelled to recognize that there is something unmanifest or invisible underneath it. We realize that the material world isn't self-explanatory. There has to be something beyond it to explain some of the things we see in the material world. And that's what led to him suggesting there is this underlying, what he called the implicate order. The second point he made was that, and this is an interesting, slightly different way of looking at it, was that both consciousness and matter/energy, instead of saying that one is more fundamental than the other, his suggestion was that maybe both of these come out of something else that's even more fundamental that we cannot name.
Yeah.
It's simply the unnameable, the unknown, and consciousness and matter energy are sort of like relatively autonomous subtotalities that emerge out of this nameless mystery. And we can give priority to one or the other in our models. And there's different ways of doing both of those. But ultimately, the ultimate is just something we cannot talk about. We cannot, it's beyond language or thought.
So is that you talk about that in your chapter, Nish?
Yes. Well, I've developed a model called the diamond model, which owes a lot to Bohm. And what I suggest here is that what I'm calling subject and object emerge out of an underlying wholeness, which is why we can see these difficult to understand interactions between subject and object, such as how does the particle know that we're looking at it? That question, that suggests that there's a deeper underlying wholeness behind subject and object. If we generalize that subject is consciousness, object is matter, energy, then in this more cosmic ontological sense, consciousness and matter become these two fundamental realities that are interacting to produce the cosmos.
Wow. Yeah. That's fascinating. So can I real quick, and we have a little bit of time left, but Brandy and Mo, can you talk about your chapters, just kind of summarize because this is what the great thing about the book is that there's so many different contributors. Some are physicists, some are mathematicians, some are scientists, some are mystics. And so you kind of get a nice rounded view of different perspectives of how people approach the topic. And I know that the three of you here approach this slightly differently, come at the topics just slightly differently. So Brandy, what do you say? How are you coming at it in your chapter?
Yeah, so my chapter looks at an ancient Gnostic text called the Sophia of Jesus Christ and how it reframes what we've traditionally called the fall. So instead of a moral failure, it describes a kind of descent of consciousness into density or into embodiment. And the experience of separation and mortality kind of comes online at that point. So what really struck me in that text is how central the imagery of light is. God isn't portrayed as a distant ruler, but as infinite light reflecting upon itself. And creation begins not with rupture, but with light mirroring light. Like creation is emanation. And that language resonates with both Genesis, let there be light, and with modern physics, which describes the universe emerging from radiant energy. And when you place the Sophia text alongside thinkers like Bohm or Max Planck, the parallels are pretty fascinating. They're all pointing toward a reality where matter isn't fundamental, but it arises from a deeper unified field. Like Nish, what you were saying, what Bohm called that undivided wholeness. And he describes reality as holographic, or as a holographic display within consciousness. So in a hologram, each fragment still contains the whole image encoded within it. So when creation is understood as an emanation instead of separation, then we can see that to be created in the image of God is to reflect the fullness of God. Like, in other words, we are fractals of God. So my chapter just explores this convergence between ancient cosmology and quantum theory. And it suggests that what we experience as fragmentation is actually a reflective expression of a deeper unity, and that each being carries the whole within it. And in that framework, the human story is not one of moral failure, but of a forgotten origin. And Jesus arrives not to rescue us from punishment, but to awaken us to the light that has already been our essence.
Yeah, it's so good, so fascinating.
And your chapter I really enjoyed it, and I actually downloaded the PDF of the Sophia of Jesus Christ. So I'm in the process of reading that right now.
Nice, thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, Mo, and tell us about your chapter. How did you come at this?
Sure. I started with a narrative of someone who was an actor playing the role of a villain in an upcoming horror film. And I use that as a metaphor for the way that we sometimes lose ourselves in this role of the body mind. This actor loses himself. It's kind of like a Jim Carrey or a Heath Ledger in The Joker, losing himself completely in this role and forgetting his true nature. And his journey back to his true nature is, I use the trip through a black hole, 4 aspects of traveling through a black hole, which eventually peels off all that is not essential to his nature so that he can come back to his real self. And his journey parallels our journey to this undivided, indivisible, infinite whole from which all of existence emerges.
Yeah,
that's
amazing.
Great. Yeah.
So good.
Well, this has been an amazing conversation, one that I have truly enjoyed. And I feel like this is probably a good place to end it. And to thank you all for taking the time to come on the podcast with us. To thank you, Keith, for taking on a role of a co-host, which I really appreciate. And if anybody has any parting words before we leave,
I just wanted to say thank you. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, and we'll definitely connect to all of you guys through the show notes. We'll connect to the book. We'll do all that stuff in our show notes. And again, I just want to say thank you very, very much for taking the time to talk with me and Keith and giving us a great conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to This Is Not Church. Be sure to rate and review the podcast on your platform of choice. If you would like to partner with us, visit patreon.com/thisisnotchurch, where you will receive exclusive content such as early access to episodes, videos of upcoming episodes, and live Q&A sessions. Be sure to check out our Facebook group or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode.